Part of Imperial Oil's environmental policy is to ensure that environmental risks associated with company activities are identified, assessed, and managed. Over the years, Esso has implemented many different programs to keep products from escaping into the environment. In many cases, Esso's practices for protecting the environment go well beyond the legal requirements. That's part of the company's commitment to being the industry leader in environmental excellence. And this doesn't apply to just the big things like pipelines, refineries, and supertankers. Take service stations, for example. There are lots of ways for products to escape into the environment. Sure, the amounts are usually small, but if it happens often enough, over a long enough period of time, and you multiply it by the thousands of service stations across the country, you can end up with a significant soil and groundwater contamination problem. Customers spill some. And after a certain number of years, some underground tanks and piping can develop slow leaks. Which is why Esso started an underground tank replacement program that uses the latest materials and techniques to make sure new tanks don't let product escape into the soil. And then there's the problem of overfilling underground tanks, which can happen for a number of different reasons. Sludge or a foreign object could keep the dipstick from touching the bottom of the tank, making your outage look bigger than it really is. Or maybe the tank has shifted in the ground so that it's tilted, which could have the same effect on the dip. Perhaps the delivery card shows what should be the correct rated capacity for a tank, but because of small variations in the manufacturing process, the tank may not quite hold its full rated capacity. The same thing can happen if a tank becomes deformed after being in the ground a long time. Or maybe the weather is just awful and you rush your dip a little. Whatever the reason, overfilling allows product to escape into the environment. That's why Esso is introducing the 95% fill procedure, which applies to all underground storage tanks, including agency tankage from coast to coast. This is simply a logical extension of our ongoing commitment to environmental excellence. From now on, your outage calculations will be based on 95% of the tank's rated capacity, rather than the full capacity. By deliberately leaving a 5% margin for error, we'll be able to significantly reduce the occurrence of overfilling, resulting in much less soil contamination. There's really not that much to it. Say your dip is 10,000 liters on a tank that's rated as holding 50,000 liters. From now on, instead of calculating the outage as 40,000 liters, which is the difference between your dip and the tank's capacity, you would calculate it to be only 37,500 liters. That's the difference between the dip and 47,500 liters, or 95% of the tank's capacity. It's not a big deal, but it is a good deal for the environment, and we're counting on you to make this procedure work. We'll be doing a couple of things to help you. First, each region will come up with ways to remind you. For example, the delivery card could be modified to show both the rated capacity and the 95% fill level. Check with local management to see what they'll be doing. Secondly, we've started installing automatic overfill preventers in all new and replacement tanks. Here's how they work. A simple two-stage shut-off valve fits inside the filler pipe. It's activated by a float that senses the fluid level in the tank. During normal delivery, the float is in the rest position, and the valve is fully open. The valve is shielded from the flow of incoming product by a deflection hood. As long as the level in the tank is below 95%, the valve remains fully open. Dipping and delivery are unaffected. Although there is a slight reduction in the flow rate, a small price to pay for the environmental protection these valves provide. When the level exceeds 95% of tank capacity, the float will rise enough to unlock the valve, allowing it to project beyond the deflection hood. The incoming flow will catch the valve and force it closed. At this point, a surge relief valve will open momentarily to reduce the shock caused by the sudden closure. A small bypass valve remains open, allowing about 20 liters per minute to flow into the tank when the main valve is closed. If for some reason your outage calculation is off and you go over 95%, you'll know you've triggered the main valve when the delivery hose kicks from the shock of the valve closing suddenly. You may also hear the valve click, and you'll notice a drastic reduction in the flow rate. You should close the delivery valve and give the hose a little time to drain down through the bypass valve. Then disconnect the hose and walk it down toward the filler pipe to make sure that all the product has drained through the bypass valve into the tank. Once the hose and fill pipe have finished draining, the valve will reopen, although it will not return to the locked-in open position where it is shielded by the deflector hood. So if you try to deliver more product, the flow will catch the valve and force it closed again, and the draining process will have to be repeated. If you keep doing this, the float will rise to its final position at 98%, where not only is the main valve closed, but the bypass valve closes as well, and it won't reopen until the tank is drained down to 95%. Now you've got a mess on your hands because you'll have nowhere to drain your delivery hose. Of course, if you calculate your outage properly using the 95% fill level, you'll hardly notice that these valves are in place. But if something does go wrong, they will protect the environment and keep you out of trouble. And remember, the 95% procedure applies to all underground tanks, whether they're fitted with overfill preventers or not. You'll notice that we're also installing a new kind of fill box along with the overfill preventers. These are actually spill containers designed to catch and hold anything that escapes from the hose or fittings, rather than letting it seep into the soil. The retailer or agent is responsible for keeping these spill containers cleaned out. The driver is responsible for cleaning up any spilled product at the time of delivery. You should report any spill containers that are not being maintained. It's also the retailer's or agent's responsibility to take the 95% fill procedure into account when placing an order, and for the dispatcher to keep it in mind when writing up the order, so that by the time it gets to you, you can count on the fact that everybody is making their calculations on the same basis. Whether you're an employee or a hired carrier, your help in making the 95% fill procedure work, along with the installation of overfill preventers and spill containers, is going to go a long way toward eliminating the soil and water contamination associated with service stations and agencies. This national procedure, effective March 1st, 1991, applies to all underground tanks, regardless of whether they're equipped with overfill preventers. As we said before, it's not a big deal, but it's a good deal for the environment.